All right, nice to see all of the additional guests in the last couple minutes. That's let's see, Matt and Melinda and Angela. I think I said hi to the others. So let's do that one. Let's start live video. Okay, I think I have all of my computers working. Nice to see you.
Hey, do I need my Bible?
Please, this is not a Bible study. Just
We don't do that.
That's for real.
That was a dumb.
All right.
Next.
What was that? Next time? Yeah. Actually, next time we'll be talking about Jesus. So we'll definitely look at the New Testament, and I'll introduce that at the end. All right. Let me pray for us. Thanks, Father, for a great evening, and those who are able to join as we talk about historiography and we talk about this sacred text that you've given us. And we ask that you please just help us to understand it. That's what we're looking for. We want to understand today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, this is our last one on our exegesis section. So you remember our box. I'm not going to do that again every single time, but we have an exegetical box. And we've got one that's the Trinity, which we started talking about, but we're going to return to next week. We've got one on presuppositions. We've got one on community, how that helps in our interpretation. And then we got the exegesis box. And in exegesis, we're talking about a few things. We're talking about literary exegesis, more thematic exegesis, and today we're talking about history. And there's the monster. Hello? Okay. Go away, dog. I am not in my home, as you can tell, or my office, and this dog is trying to get my bread. Go away. Go find somebody else to put. Okay. Hi. All right. Anyway, what am I talking about? Exegesis, history. So we spent 2 weeks talking about historiography so far. Historiography is what? Anybody remember that?
The written history.
Right. Different than history with an IE, which is the actual event that took place. But yeah, so we're dealing with written history. Sorry, very distracted with this dog. So what do we want to review? How about you guys help me out with the review part? How about the vocalic world of interpretation? Who wants to take that on? Thanks, Karen. Yes, I will not be teaching with the dog from now on. It makes me look stupid. So, all right, I'm going to draw it. You guys are going to explain it to me. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Remember our little guy down here? He's got the binoculars, right? And he's looking back into the past. Yeah. He's in the church. And he is looking back into the past. And this is the us world, the world of us. You and me and how we interpret things.
Where's the stained glass windows?
I love you, Lisa. Thank you. Here's our stained glass windows.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. He is looking at his binoculars and he is looking back into the past all the way to this world, which we call the what?
Event.
Event.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Event.
Usually that's where we stop, right? That's the event world. That's the world of the thing that actually happened. Now we're making some assumptions because there's something that's written about something we assume happened, but we don't know for sure if it really happened. I'm not going to talk about this, but you remember the world that's super important is this world of the what?
Author.
Author.
So we're doing all the vowels. This is the U, this is the E, this is the A, and this is all about interpretation. And that is the I, which I can't seem to. Is the I. So the author is what we have. So we don't have any access to the event. We only have access to the author's writing about the event. So he's interpreting, and then there's this other world here we just call other, and they're interpreting the author's interpretation of the event. So here we are interpreting other people's interpretation of the author's interpretation of the event, right? We're already jumping through a few
Right.
different worlds to understand things. Okay, so that is that. There's the clear my drawing here, get off the sharing page. Okay, so that's what we need to remember. That's, I hope, the big thing you've gotten out of the historiography. But we also talked about why a historian would tell his story. He's not just telling a story to give you old history, to give you things that happened in the past. He's giving it to you for a purpose. He wants you to do something with this information. He wants you to believe something. He wants you to actually do something. He wants you to feel something. We don't know exactly what he's trying to get at. That's what hermeneutics is. That's why we do literary exegesis. That's why we do thematic exegesis. That's why we're doing this historical exegesis. We're trying to figure out what it is that he's trying to get us to feel, believe, or do. So if Moses is the author, he's trying to get us to understand something, not us. He's trying to get his people, his readers, to understand something for his time. So you might have Moses as one author, and then later on, another author is going to come by, and he's going to add to things that Moses said for a new generation. So now the meaning of that original text has changed because he wants you to understand it for something new. And then later on, maybe during the exile, someone else is going to come along, and they're going to change this. So remember, this is really important that you don't hear a lot. The Bible changes over history. Okay, over the hundreds of years from when it's being written, it's whatever was originally penned or even originally spoken of, that happened even before that, right? To when it was penned, to when it was repenned for a new audience, to when it was repenned for a new audience after that, it changes. Every time that you omit something or you edit something, you subtract, oh, that's omitting, add something, change, scratch something off and put something in the margins, and then someone else reads those margins and they add those things into the actual text, it changes the. So anytime an editor edits something, they become in some sense an author. Does that make sense? So redactors are authors.
Yes.
And this happens in a lot of books. You might see, you'll see a book that's written who the main author is, and then underneath you have a smaller author. Sometimes those smaller authors are editors. They work for the editing company, the publishing company, but they've edited so much, they've reorganized it so much that really they need to have some authorship. It's also their stuff. Even if the content was all originally someone else's, they've made it their own and they've moved forward with it. So they become an author as well. Yes, Lisa. Is that a hand up?
What do you do with, yes. What do you do with where Peter says, don't add anything? You'll be in big trouble if you add anything to this book.
Yeah, John says that. And
John? Yeah, John.
that's in the book of Revelation.
Did he tell Moses?
Yeah.
Specifically talking about that book, Revelation, not the Bible. because
That
there is no
book.
Bible. So he's
Okay.
talking about those chapters. Of course, there's no chapters either, but the book of the apocalypse. That's what he's talking about.
So do you think that one book has not changed throughout history?
There's a lot less change going on in the New Testament than there is in the Old Testament, for sure. But no, there's definitely changes that go on in there. But what he means is he doesn't want there to be new information going out. It's written for a particular time and a particular person. So it doesn't mean that there's not changes between Jesus Christ and Christ Jesus. He's not adding all information. That's what I think he's trying to get at. Don't change.
Okay.
Don't let a prophet come in and say some of these things are not true. These are the things that are true and that we need to hold on to. But the Bible is a very flexible.
Okay, thanks.
It's pliable. All right, so that's what we've been talking about. Let's see if there's anything else from the past that we needed to jump into. Remember, we talked about different types of histories: autobiographies, genealogies, memoirs, legal records, etc. we had two extremes. Either the Bible is historical or it isn't historical. And we came up with a bunch of things. We said, well, the Bible's inspired. Does that make it historical or not historical? That doesn't really answer the question for us just because it's inspired. It could be either one. There are other texts that treat the Bible as historical. Yes, that's helpful, but also these new authors are not trying to not trying to say whether something's historical or not. Just because they quote Moses as saying something doesn't mean that they believe that Moses actually wrote it necessarily. Or if someone says Jonah lived, it doesn't mean they really just like I would say, you know, King Arthur, and you would all say, yeah, we know what you're talking about, even though we know King Arthur probably wasn't around. So it doesn't answer the question.
Thank you. Number two.
Yeah. So genre criticism is always changing. We said just because things change.
Writing.
All right, I'm gonna just shut somebody down there. Let's see.
We got it.
Good man. All right. And then we said a slippery slope argument. Can't be historical. If one thing's not historical, then everything's not historical. If Moses didn't really part the Red Sea, well, then Jesus didn't rise from the dead. And we said, no, that doesn't follow. One thing doesn't automatically follow to the other. We said there are historical contradictions in the Bible. This is all stuff from the past, historical contradictions. And we talked about the ancient Near East and how all that worked. We talked about magic and supernatural. People say the Bible can't be true because it has supernatural things in it, but we're Christians, for crying out loud. The Bible, I mean, supernatural is part of what we believe. So we do believe that stuff can happen. So anyway, let's talk about the ancient Near East. So this is probably pretty short time today. I really want to kind of have some discussion if we get time for it. I think we will though, because I only have a couple main things I want to do. I want to say two ways that we need to read are as an ancient, as somebody who is primitive man, you could say it like that. Someone who's not a modern, read not as a modern person, and read mythologically. So I'm kind of trying to say the same thing with all of this. So nice to see all of you guys, Jamie and Allison and Sandy and Karen. And nice to also have Karen and John and Riston joining us too. Glad you guys are here. All right, so if you've got notes, I got lots of pictures on the notes this time, and you are missing out if you don't see the picture. I'm not going to show them to you anymore. They're pretty awesome, and you could also just Google ancient Near Eastern view of the world, and it'll come up. So here's the things I want to say. First thing I want to say, the Bible is not a modern book. I feel like I said this a lot of times. This is not overly profound, and everyone knows it's not a modern book, but we still think that it's written to us. So the Bible is not written to us. It's not written to you. It's written to a group of people at a particular time for a particular reason. It is written for us in that the Holy Spirit has guided this book throughout generations to be able to help us, but it's not a modern book. And so it's not trying to answer modern questions. I've said that a lot of times, I think. It's not anything brilliant. So I can probably move on, and the other things I say will add to that different thing. So the second thing I say in there is that we need to think like primitive man. So that's saying the same thing. Not a modern book. We need to think like primitive man. We need to think like somebody 2,000 years ago. How are they going to see the world? How are they going to think about the way things are structured? And so I say number 3, consider the ancient Near Eastern worldview. All right, you're going to hear me talk about the ancient Near Eastern worldview a lot. If you read any kind of scholarly books, you're going to see that this abbreviation a lot. A&E. So ancient Near East. And you know what that means. Ancient means old. Near East means, well, not like East, not like China, but Near East, the closer to us East, right? Which is like the Mediterranean Sea area. That's Europe and Northern Africa and whatever that little section that we call the Middle East is. So this is Israel, right? This is the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Red Sea, all of those things in there. So that's ancient Near East. And they're going to see the world very differently than we do. So when we talk about the creation of the world, we're thinking about a globe right? I don't know what a globe looks like, whatever. That's a really bad globe, but you get the idea, right? That's what we're thinking about. They're not thinking about that at all. They have a very different perspective. So when we say in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, what are we thinking about versus what they're thinking about? We might be thinking, this is the place where God dwells. This is the place where man dwells. Or this could be translated as sky. And this could be translated as land. Okay, the Eretz and Hashemayim. I got nowhere to write Hashemayim. But the sky and the earth, that's probably the way they're thinking, because they don't believe in a globe. Keep this in mind, right? Jesus was probably a flat earther.
You should turn the volume down on your iPad more or something. There's definitely an echo.
I did the same thing last time. All right. Can I do it? It's muted, so I don't know what to do.
Well, just keep going then. It's not awful.
Yeah, it's repeating for me too. It's annoying.
That's better.
Better being farther away. All right, I'll try and keep it way over there, away from stuff. All right. So, whoops, I still want to share it with you. Okay, so when they're thinking about the creation of the world that they see is very different than ours. We're thinking about China's on the other side of the world. They don't know that. In their primitive view, they only know what they can see. They can see the oceans around them and they can see the mountains. Nobody's traveling further than those oceans and mountains. So when they think about what the world looks like in Genesis chapter 1, they're going to be thinking about it more like this. They think about they have pillars of the earth, okay, which are the mountains on either side of them. And here they are on the land, and we've got some water. Okay, and this is mankind. Adam is living on the land, and the land is what we call the Eretz. Okay, which is the same word, by the way, for land of Israel, like Eretz, Israel, the Eretz there. And then there is some sort of a dome. Okay, think Captain America's shield is going to be over. It's that kind of shape of something, and we call that a rakia. If you're in the King James, it says that God created a firmament. Okay, which is a word that we don't really know, firmament, but maybe the NIV says an expanse. So basically, he has to somehow take care of the waters down here and the waters up here. So we've got a whole bunch of water up here now. And this dome is meant to hold back the water up there. So this is what God's doing in his creation story. And most of you have seen me do this or heard me do this a million times, right? So first of all, he creates the light. We don't know where the light is in this story. Okay. But by day 4, he's going to create the stars and the moon and the sun. And they're going to be in the rakia, in the dome. On day 2, it says he's going to separate the waters. That's the waters up here from the waters down here. Right? And on day 3, he's going to separate these waters from these waters. And he's going to let the dry ground is going to appear.
And the water is chaos and disorder. He's making a place for us.
That's right. So the water, and you'll remember this from other classes, is yam, right? Which means sea. And it usually is chaos, exactly like Travis said. Okay, but especially if the water is everywhere, right? So if we've got water all here, right, that makes it impossible for this man to live. So he's living in tohu vabohu. Okay, I said that just for you, Karen, if you're still watching. Okay. This is the tohu vabohu world there, or what's her word for it? Sudoku. Tofu Sudoku is how she said it. Just for fun. Okay, but so what he has to do is he has to separate this. He's got to see, is there a way I can erase this? Yeah. Right? So he's making all this stuff so that man can live. So by Genesis 6, this is the creation or the ordering. In Egyptian we call this ma'at, order. Okay, it's how everything comes together. It's how God holds the universe together. It's order. So by the time of Genesis 6, God is so unhappy with this world, he's going to open the floodgates of heaven, right? And this water will come down. And then
Yes.
so that mankind can no longer live. So what we do is we get a little boat here. Okay, and it's going to be on top of the water there. This is the world that they live in. So when they're telling you this story, that's how they see it. And if you look at the pictures that I have on here, you can see that each one of these, that pretty much is what it ends up looking like. I can't there. So
Question, Jace.
Yeah.
This water's depicted as chaos, but it's also being depicted as cleansing of the earth, correct? If we have typology, if we go, there's kind of a connection, hyperlink with baptism and water. Is that correct?
Water. So usually fresh water is considered to be good and salt water is considered to be bad. It's not always the case, but God sometimes uses bad water or salt water or chaos monsters, Leviathan, Yam, all that stuff. He uses that in order to defeat other chaotic monsters. So for instance, in the Red Sea, when they cross the Red Sea, he's going to split open the sea, the Leviathan, the monster, in order to destroy Egypt, who's going to come through the sea. So he's going to use chaos to destroy chaos. Okay, but sometimes he uses it to destroy everything. Well, not sometimes. In this one particular case in Genesis chapter 6. And then, of course, it's going to go, the waters are going to go down. Things are going to start disappearing. I don't know which one to erase. All right, you get the idea.
Similar motif, not meaning to take you off track, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like the tree, he uses the chaos to cure the chaos or the water with the water. A similar way, the garden with the tree. Is there something going on because Jesus is the second Adam and he's redeeming creation on a tree as well? Is the
Yeah, those kinds of hyperlinks exist, and we're using language that Tim Mackey likes to use, hyperlinks, which is computer language, right? Those thematic or illusions exist throughout the Bible. So you could follow the Spirit of God, you could follow the tree of life, and yeah, you're going to see how Jesus culminates or climaxes the covenant in each one of those places. So yeah, and so water is a motif. These are just what we call light motifs, L-E-I-T, or key motifs, keywords that are going to travel through the entire Bible. So, yep. And they're super helpful, I think. And I think it's one of the coolest things to be able to show, not only are these guys literary geniuses, but the Holy Spirit is doing something and bringing all of these books together and showing us this big story that, to me, makes it really exciting. All right, let's close this out. There we go. Okay, so here's what we got. Bible's not a modern book. We need to take it as a primitive man, read it as a primitive man, and we need to consider in all of this the ancient Near Eastern worldview. Okay, this is the way they see the world. They're not going to see it as a globe. There's more things that they're not going to see this the way we see. So I've said many times, don't consider evolution. Like Moses isn't trying to conquer evolution because he's never heard of it. He's not thinking about things like that. He's dealing with other things in Genesis 1 besides that. Okay, they think that the temple is the center of any temples are where gods and mankind meet in some sort of a heaven and earth coming together moment. They have all of these different views on things, purity views in the way that they live. If you touch things that are unclean, you become impure, so you can no longer come close to this holy God. These are the worlds that they live in. You need sacrifices. That's the world they live in. That's not our world. We don't believe those things really do those things, but they did. And so they understood them differently. And we need to jump into their world to understand what the principles are behind these ideas, what they're trying to get at. So another big word that we need to talk about is Etiology. Okay, this is part of being in the ancient Near East. If you grew up in a culture other than, well, no, our culture does it too. Here's what etiology is, and sometimes it's spelled with an A, by the way, etiology, and some people say etiology. So it doesn't matter what you say. Here would be here's what etiology means, or etiology means. It means, how did these things that we see come to be the way they are? That's what a lot of the Bible passages are. So how did snakes get shunned by other animals? Right? Why are snakes loners? I don't know. Or why don't snakes have legs? That would be a really good question. And so Grandpa said, oh, young Ibrahim, let me tell you why snakes don't have legs. One time, many, many years ago, before time existed, the snake stole away the tree of life from mankind, and the gods cursed the snake with having to crawl on its belly for the rest of its life. Okay, that's how you get that story. And then maybe later on, Moses came along and he found that particular story and pulled it in, and he changed it to not be the gods, but to be God specifically. And not that snake stole the tree of life so much, but that he tempted, or that he was a false prophet and told them to go a different direction. So he kind of stole the tree of life. And you can find, by the way, snakes stealing trees of life in other literature besides the Bible. That's a pretty common, I don't know how common it is, but I can think of at least one or two other stories where that happens. So if you look at the story of Utnapishtim, you can see that story where he goes and he finds the tree of, not the tree of life, he finds the, he's trying to figure out how immortality works. And so Utnapishtim was on a boat apparently and survived. And so Gilgamesh is coming and he's saying, how do I find immortality like you do? And he tells them about this. And I may have my story a little bit off because I'm just doing this from memory, but he tells them that there is a plant that grows in the ocean, and so, or in the water in a lake. And so Gilgamesh, I'm pretty sure it's Gilgamesh, or is it Atrahasis? Who cares? He jumps into the water and he gets this plant, this tree, this green life tree that's going to give him immortality forever. And he puts it on the shore and he goes back, swims a little bit longer, and the snake comes up and steals it, takes off with it. All right. So
and the reason why he knows is because the snake sheds his skin and leaves it in the boat.
So it's just a great story about a snake stealing away immortality, which is exactly what Genesis does. So maybe the author of Genesis, we'll assume it's Moses for the sake of art, just to have something. Moses knows that story, but he changes it in order to have it fit into the story that he wants us to get. Right? He's telling us a symbolic story about temples and false prophets and all these other things that are going on. Okay, so we're talking about myth, and we're talking about on history and how they come together. And etiology is one of the ways they come together. So, and if you just think about Genesis, just stay in that same world. Like, why is childbirth so darn painful? Well, darn it, women, you shouldn't have, been deceived by the snake. So they tell a story about why it got like that. Why is it so hard for man and woman to get along? Well, let me tell you, right? Because women want to rule over man, right? That's the wording in Genesis. Or why is earning a living so hard? Why do I have to sweat every day I go to work? Why is this so difficult? Well, it's because you scumbags sinned. Shouldn't have sinned. If you hadn't sinned, then it would have been much easier to do this stuff. Why do we all have to die? Well, let me tell you, you had choice. You could have gone with life for everlasting, right? These are all etiological things. And if you grow up in other cultures, some of you have different cultures here and you grew up in them, you're going to have those stories about all kinds of, like in Africa, why does the zebra have stripes? Well, the zebra was running away from a lion and there was a forest fire in the reeds, and he was there and the smoke wafted onto him and it stuck in that particular pattern where the reeds were all coming up, right? You just tell a story to make up something. They say, what is that noise that's coming out of the sky when it rains? say, oh, well, I don't, what did you tell your kids? What's that noise, that thunderous noise that happens? Did you tell your kids anything when they were little? The angels were bowling, or I don't know.
God was angry.
God was angry. Okay. Yep. So these are just etiological stories that you're coming up with some answer to things.
Clouds.
What? I missed that. All right. But
Clouds were bumping together.
The gods were doing something together.
The clouds were bumping together. Sorry,
Okay,
there's
all right.
a delay on my.
Get your mind out of the gutter, Jace Brothers.
I'm pretty sure I didn't have any dirty thoughts until just now. All right. So these are the kinds of things we do it with all kinds of things. We make up stories in order to create some ideas for our children or for ourselves as to what's happening. And primitive man may have believed some of these stories, and some of the stories they just wrote just for fun. They would just tell these stories for fun because they're good. So that's what's happening in etiology. All right. Any questions about that idea of primitive man, ancient Near East? So we talked a lot about genre criticism here when we dealt with literary stuff. So let me just bring that back in, the idea of folktale, the idea of myth, legend, Sagen, which is saga is how we say it, but in German they have all these different words for things. All of this is historiography. All of these are things that once they write them down, they're combining myth and history together. And that's okay. The only reason we don't like it is because we think that the Bible is historical and that's what it's designed to do, but it's not necessarily all it's designed to do. It's okay for us to mix myth in. In fact, myth isn't something that's not true. Myth is, in scholarly circles, myth is something that's bigger than truth, right? It tells a larger story, an archetypal kind of story. So Adam and Eve may be a mix of history and myth, maybe, in that let's just say that it's completely historically true, but it's also mythological. It also represents something much bigger than itself. It's talking about mankind and, this tree of temptation that's in the middle of the garden. Isn't this the same tree that we see all the time? Like every day there's a tree in the middle of the garden that's tempting us, whether it's watching porn or it's telling a white lie or it is deceiving our spouse just a little, so it makes us seem a little bit better, or it's a Facebook post that's just not even close to true, whatever. I don't know what your temptations are to be whatever you are, but these temptations, that's the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So myth, legend, saga, folktale, these are all just different representations of how historically accurate it is. And so they're all going to have different, they're all going to have different levels. Legend, Robin Hood is a legend. Okay, there's something, and King Arthur is a legend. It's not mythological, but it's probably not historical. It's somewhere in between. Exodus, if you read through the Exodus events, you'll see a lot of folktale kinds of things in there. That doesn't mean it's not historical. It means that they've added in things to make it more story-like. They're telling a story. So we don't name the Pharaoh, for instance, because we want it to be larger than life. It's not just Pharaoh against Moses. It's the gods of Egypt against the gods of Israel, or the God of Israel. A princess comes out and rescues a child from the Nile River, right? That's the Sargon myth retold. So if you have never read the Sargon Great story, then you're missing out. Okay, that's a story of someone who's put in the river and picked up by a princess goddess and marries this goddess and becomes kind of a demigod of some sort. So these stories exist out there, and you see them all over the place. So we don't need to go into great detail, but you get the idea of a folktale and the way that they add some storyline to it. That's good storytelling. Anybody who tells a story without adding to it, without embellishing, isn't telling a good story. Some of you I talk to on the phone individually, I'm always like, no, make that story better, right? If you broke your leg, you don't tell me you stepped off a curb. There should be some more to it, right? There should be a lion attack somewhere in the story. Just make the story better, okay? At what point does it become not historical anymore? You have to determine that, right? So even in sermon telling, like if I'm giving a sermon, I'm doing a lot of the same things. Sometimes I will tell stories and hopefully at the end, well, not hopefully, I don't know, depends on the sermon teller. Maybe he's going to just totally make something up and he's never going to tell you he made it up. So you think it's true about him. That's okay. That's the genre of sermonizing. So it's okay for him to tell that story like that because he's trying to get across a point. These are genres, history in history. Okay, does all that make sense? Do you guys have any questions about that stuff before I get into reading mythologically specifically? I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it, but then I want you guys to talk. So I hope you're writing down cool things to talk about for the second half of this. What time is it? Yep. I'm close to being done. All right, so I've already defined in my second section here, I said read mythologically. I've already defined myth, the word myth, as stories about gods and not people, or not just people. That's how Hermann Gunkel, who is the father of form criticism, that's how he defined it. So whenever I say the word myth, you need to remember that I don't mean something that's fictional. I mean something that's bigger than life. It's something that fits in every man, kind of an idea, an archetypal story. That's what I'm talking about. And it always includes gods or a god. Right? And that's generally the Bible is always including these gods. So the Bible is mythological by that definition. So when people say, is the Bible myth? And they ask me that question, I say, what do you mean by myth? If they mean fiction, then I say, no, I don't think it's fiction. Or I don't think it's mere fiction or only fiction. I think there's more to it than that. Okay, so that's the definition. So myth, when we talk about myth, we talk about something taking place outside of time and something taking place outside of location. So sacred time and sacred space are really important to all of this. So in the ancient Near East, they have what they would call cyclical time. Anybody seen the new Netflix, or no, Amazon Prime, Wheel of Time? There's a new Wheel of Time series out? Nope. Anybody read the books? Nope. Okay. Very famous. Yes, good. We got one person who's read the books. Wheel of Time. So in the story, like everything comes back on itself. Okay. That's the normal idea of things. But that's not the way Israel is. Israel has a very linear, they've got genealogies, they're telling stories, but there is still some repetition in the stories. There's things that can circle back on a regular basis. So they have this idea that they call Erzeit Insight. I will write that. Erzeit Insight. And you know the word zeit from like zeitgeist and stuff like that, right? It's the times. So this is the beginning time and the end time. Oh, how amazing how that works, right? So beginning time is that what we call primeval history. You probably knew Genesis 1 through 11 is called primeval or primordial history. It's a history, but it's not history. It's primeval. It's before history. It's this time before time. And the same takes place in Revelation. If you go to the very end site, you go all the way to the end, you're going to see this cyclical pattern that will go all the way back, right? It starts in a garden, and what do we have in the end? We have kind of a garden city that takes place, right? We still have a tree of life growing, but now it's growing on both sides of the river. And the leaves are for the healing of the nations. Like, it's grabbing hold of these ideas. We have a sea that's being created in the very beginning, but the sea is done away with at the end, right? Or let's not say sea is being created, because it's not being created. It's already there right in the very beginning, Genesis 1-2. But it's there, and God tames it, and in the end, he conquers it. He moves it on. There will be no more sea. That's what I mean by these Ertzeit, Endzeit things. So they think in ideas, in big picture ideas, in mythological ideas, and they work those into their writing. And sometimes those are going to have historical connections, and sometimes they're not going to. So we see linear history, we see some kind of chronological movement, but the myth is so entrenched in there that we can't separate the myth from the history. So when I teach this in seminary, I talk about mythicized history or historicized myth. Okay, and I don't know which one it is. They're mixed together in beautiful ways. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing, unless you are needed to be a modern understanding of history. But we've already said, let's not think like a modern. We got to think like somebody in primitive time. And the same thing happens outside of location. Like there's, so myth happens like in the heavens. Remember, the Bible even talks about Earth being kind of a copy of what it is in heaven. There's this other representation. And when you go into temples, you enter into this other domain, like the place of the gods. That's where they live. They've connected with us in some way. Heaven and earth come together in that little spot. We've done that a bunch of times too. I'll just remind you guys what I'm talking about here. Right? So we've got the world of heaven up here and the world of earth down here. And this place in between is where the temples are. That's where God comes to earth, where we combine together. Okay, so they dwell in this land, and that's what Eden is, right? Eden is one of those outside of space, outside of time places. And you're like, wait a second, it's not, because, and I had this in a class that I'm teaching for Trinity, it's not because there are a bunch of rivers that are told. Like, it gives us a geography location. But read it, sometime read these first few chapters really carefully and see if there's something told geographically, or if it's something more like, first of all, two of the rivers, we don't even know where they are. And the other one are the Tigris and the Euphrates. We know where those two are, but they're pretty far away from each other. They're not, they do connect. What?
They're in the land of Uz.
Okay, right. So another mythical land. Places that they just talk about, but that we don't ever know. And the rivers come out of Eden, and they flow into the garden. Like there's the garden of Eden. So Eden is one place and the garden is another place, but there's a garden that's connected to it. Everything about this garden world that they're living in is symbolic of what the temple is supposed to look like. And I've done that in this class before, so I'm not going to go into great detail there. But remember, it opens to the east. It has gold and all those things that Adam has on his, that later priests have on their ephod, all the different jewels and things like that they're going to wear. The temple itself and the tabernacle has the cherubim and the seraphim and the stars engraved onto the curtains and onto the gold there. So there's so many different things. They walk and they talk with God in the same way that they do in the garden. It's the same language. They're told to guard and to cultivate this garden, the same thing that they're told to do about the temple. So this place that they live in, Eden, like, you're never going to find Eden, right? Because it's not meant to be geographical. It's not meant to be in a location. If it's meant to have any kind of geographical symbolism, it's supposed to mean Israel, right? Eden is Israel. Israel is the priests for all the other nations. This is the place that God is going to show himself most glorified, and that all of the other nations are going to come and they're going to see it happen. They're going to see the glory of God in Israel. So, all right. I said that sometimes place of primeval actions. I said that. Yeah, Sinai becomes sacred in history as the burning bush, and the return of all the people to this one place. Okay, I think I said enough. Does this make most sense, kind of? I feel a little off. There's a lot of things going on in this house that are distracting, but I'm not sure if my sentences were all said correctly or not. But
You're doing a good job.
Oh, thanks. That's what I needed. Appreciate that, Josh. I don't see your face, but that's probably for all of our better. No, yeah, you're a good looking man. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. Good grief, we've got like 30 minutes left. So talk to me. Let's talk about history. We've had 3 weeks of this stuff. What are your questions? What are you thinking? Does this scare you? Does this concern you in any way? That history might not be what you thought it was? Or at this point, are you so used to this kind of stuff, you're like, whatever, Jace, we knew what you were doing.
It only concerns me because there's also myths about people raising from the dead, being risen from the dead. And so when you have, you start to get in to hairy situation, I feel, when people start to try and mythologize the resurrection. And so to me, it's not a question. I'm just saying, this is how I feel, like that, hey, there's a me trying to look into the ancient world and read the text that way, but I can't really, because I'm not in the ancient world, I'm in the modern world. So I'm trying my best to do the research and doing my homework and figuring out how the ancients thought, but I'm still confused because we don't have very much information. And then there's this guy, Jesus, this historical Jesus, this guy that comes along and does these things and says, I am the fulfillment of all these scriptures. And that's why I feel there is this draw towards people trying to figure out if Jesus was really historical. Did he really exist? Oh yeah, we have some scriptures, or a historian named Josephus who wrote about Jesus. We have some people who've done some research, and we know Jesus really did exist. Did he really rise from the dead, though? Because our whole religion is hinging on this fact. And for me, the fact that I don't believe in a historical Adam and Eve doesn't take away the fact that I do believe Jesus rose from the dead. But for others, it does. And my question is this: how do you approach someone who says, well, if Adam and Eve aren't real, then how is Jesus rising from the dead real? What do you say to that person?
Yeah, so we talked about that last week, kind of the slippery slope argument that exists.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and it's a great question, truthfully. So I would nothing is as simple as we want it to be. We're just like, well, if Adam is real, then Jesus is real. If Adam's not real, Jesus. That's a very simple explanation. But simple is not usually the way it is. So we need to actually spend a little bit of time with these people who are going to ask that question and say, okay, every story exists on its own. Every story has its own genre. And we've got to determine what that genre is. And what is it that gives us those kinds of things? So for me, for instance, if you were to say you don't believe in Adam and Eve, I'm not saying that for me necessarily, but I hear what you're saying, right? That there's no Adam and Eve. There's a lot of things in the text that give you genre clues that this shouldn't be that way, right? It shouldn't be historical, right? Talking snake, Adam's name means mankind. They come in this weird Eden paradise story that looks like there's a lot of things that tell you that genre is not meant to be historical only. But when you get to the New Testament, you've got 4 different biographies of Jesus, all of which have a different kind of genre. I mean, there's something going on there, but not only there, but when you get to more didactic texts, when you get to like Paul's letters, Paul will say things about the resurrection of Jesus where he's, I would say, pretty blatant that this is really important. Like it's not the same as some of these other things. Like it's very important that we believe Jesus was like literally raised from the dead. And I think that there's a reason Jesus did raise from the dead. And I think it's because it is in myth. I think those ideas are in myth, and he was trying to become, I'm sure you can quote the C.S. Lewis quote, probably.
Myth. Yeah, the true myth. Yeah, and I know, and I get that, and it culminates. It's beautiful, actually. I think it's absolutely beautiful, the whole thing. But it's really, to me, it's not that complicated, even though it's very complex. it's simple yet complex, that paradox. You know, I want to dive into the complexities of the ancient Near East, but I'm also realizing that and I'll just say this, and then I'll be quiet because I want to hear what other people have to say. I've gone into other religions in depth, and Jesus has just resonated with my heart. I've always come back to Christ. I've gone down rabbit holes, and I tend to go down rabbit holes sometimes in my studies, even today. Now, I like to get, and that's what this Tuesday school is. It's kind of like a rabbit hole-esque thing, you know, where we can go off, but we can always come back and get recentered. So one of the reasons I think Jesus is so important and so it's simple for me is because it resonates with my heart. And nothing can, I mean, and I've had my own experiences. And so that speaks volumes for me as far as my spirituality and what I feel is the right way. And so there's nobody can argue me into that, my faith, right, or out of it. It's just there. So I'm more open to a non-historical Adam per se, but from what I understand, the evangelical world, most of the evangelical world is not. And you've personally felt some backlash from that, and I'm not gonna, you know, put that on blast, but I know you know what that means. How do you try and convince someone who is maybe a fundamentalist Christian on the very far right-hand side of Christianity in 2022 to approach the text in this way?
I think classes like this are a good way, maybe. I mean,
Well, those are I don't know about the people on the far extreme. The people on the far extreme aren't going to come to a class like this. The people on the far extreme, you're not going to convince. You're not going to, you know. I don't know if it's our job to convince them.
I know, but like how? Okay, then Travis, how do you read an epic like Gilgamesh and then read our Old Testament and not see the correlation? Like that's to me, that is here. I don't know how you can't. I mean, anyways.
But are they reading the Epic of Gilgamesh?
No.
Probably not.
That's why we don't read those things, Josh.
Yeah,
That's
don't
not-
read
Because
because
they're the
it'll
devil. I get it. If you read
just
it,
cause
you
a
love
problem.
it.
yeah.
Because you're a heretic if you read it.
Yeah, I mean, of course there are Christians. I mean, we're setting up straw men right now, right?
Right. We're talking about the extremes.
Yeah, we're talking about the extremes that most Christians aren't in. Like, you know,
No.
that some of you guys are in at Warsaw Evangelical Press, right? Like, you know, I had 100 people coming to Sunday school and listening to this kind of stuff. And yeah, it was concerning. Like for some people, they were like, "Yee," but a lot of people were very willing to take that jump. It wasn't, and they'd grown up their whole life in fundamentalism, so they were willing to at least consider it. They weren't anti this, and I think a lot of people do have questions that they've just been shushed for a long time. I spent the week with my sister and her boyfriend, and that was last night. We had several hour discussion, and he was thrilled to just have the discussion because he's never been able to ask the questions. So he's aware of these things. He knows what Gilgamesh is, and it doesn't make any sense to him that we would try to cover that up. Like, there's not people, like, there are some people covering this stuff up, I guess, but I think if we just are honest and humble as we work through these kinds of things, I think people are going to see the way that we live, and by our fruits they'll know. We're not trying to beat them up. You know, when I started reconsidering my views on hell and on mythology and things like that, I had a lot of people really scared, but they knew me and they knew my heart, and they were able to make this work. So I think just keep showing them who you are in Jesus as you're trying to figure this stuff out, and keep to that humble. But I do think there's a difference between Old Testament mythology, New Testament mythology, both of them really, like there are, even in the stories of the Gospels, I think there are things that we can see differently. I don't think the resurrection is one of those, because I think Paul is very clear. I hate using the words very clear because then it comes back to bite me later on as I start thinking about it more deeply than I am right now. But I got in trouble over the historical Adam stuff, and I have gotten in trouble with that. So everybody listening, yes, I did. But I've also gotten in trouble for saying, for me, it doesn't matter whether the ascension took place either. Like, I think the doctrine of the ascension is absolutely essential. It's very important to know that Jesus is on the throne, that he is currently the king, that he has taken the place, his rightful place as human par excellence. Like, that is absolutely essential. But whether or not he literally ascended up into the clouds, or whether they just told that story in order to get across the theological concept, doesn't matter to me.
Well, Jason,
yeah, go
real
ahead.
quick. So perfect, because it's a theological stance, is when the ascension is a doctrine, and it's a way of interpreting the text. And so there's a theological text. That's what we talked about, the atonement. It's an approach. We have the doctrine of atonement, but we're trying to some people are grappling with what atonement means. Now, my example for a different type of theology and a way of looking at this would be the African church, who everything's backwards, so it's from below. And so the ascension, and Jesus is looked at as kind of like an ancestor. He's the because they look at their anyways, their theology is being shaped right now, and it's different, and it's still being worked out. Now, they have a reverence for the Nicene Creed and the fathers of the early church. And so some of the scholars in Africa, just that's a broad stroke there, but in Africa, right? But you have this Christianity booming in Africa because they're hearing about Christ, and they're very spirit oriented. And so they're allowing Christ to work in their heart, and it's transforming lives, and baptisms are happening and things are happening, but it fits into their culture well, without the presuppositions and dogma of the Western church per se. Now, so you're grappling with the ascension, and I don't know if some people in Africa who come to Christ, they don't even know what the ascension is, but their thought wouldn't even be that. It would be something different. Anyways, I don't know if that even helped at all.
I understood.
You look stressed out. What's that?
I understood some of what you were saying. I understood why some of it was relevant, but I don't know where to go from there.
Well, I guess I can close it. I can close it with this. The theology that we're working out here, because that's what we're talking about, is our theology. We're talking about interpreting the text and trying to we're pulling things out of it, trying to shape we're shaping our theology. At least I am. Mine's growing and being shaped and transformed, just like yours was when you said, hey, I don't believe in a historical Adam. Okay, well, that's a shape in your theology. It's a different stance you're taking. And I'm saying, I guess, I don't think it matters that much, to be honest with you.
I think what I hear you saying that I think is relevant is that we're trying to extract meaning out of something, and the way that we vocalize or put that into writing is going to be different when we're at, like, the ascension versus descension. And so we might say things differently, but really we're trying to do the same thing. It's about the deeper meaning that we're trying to get across.
Right.
And then maybe we're really more in agreement than we're not.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. It's different. We're having to, like, we talk about presuppositions, and the African's presupposition is very much different than the 16th century Germans, presuppositions. And They want to build a system. They want to systematize everything in 16th century Germany. But I guess my main point was we're trying to say the same thing, and we're all grappling with theology and what it means to follow Jesus, but Jesus is the focal point. And I think what's happening is we are realizing that we're in a post-Christian America, and we're seeing the evangelical church dying on the vine per se. And you see churches like the African church, that's a broad stroke, thriving. Why is that? We have to ask these questions here in America. I think we should be asking these questions here in America. And I know we ask tough questions here in Tuesday school that are challenging the evangelical church.
Yeah.
And I think we should be asking other questions too. So anyway.
So so all this is pretty outside the box. I didn't give my little caveat in the beginning, but how do we get back? Like, I want to say meaning is what's most important behind these stories, but I also don't want to go, and maybe this is my own failing and I need to be thinking more like some of you, but I don't want to go to the spot that it's only meaning and not history that matters. So where I just use the ascension as an example of something where the meaning is the most significant, but the history doesn't matter as much to me. I'm not willing to say the history didn't take place there yet. And I'm certainly not willing to take to the next step and say, well, resurrection, it's really the resurrection in our hearts that matters the most. Right? And it's meaning that matters, not the history. I do feel like the history is very significant when it comes to the resurrection, like essential. Like, I'm done with all of this if it didn't happen. Time for dinner. Okay. I'm almost ready. I'm almost done. I'll be done in like 10 minutes. They can start without me though. Thank you. So, like, any thoughts on that?
My thought is why? Like, why would you be done? I feel like you're just saying not to say it.
Yeah. So you're saying you shouldn't need it anymore.
I'm calling BS on I'm really done with it. Like, why would you be done with it just because of that?
All right. Or another question, why, but what about someone for atonement? I'm sorry, go ahead, answer the question. I want to hear. Why would you be done with it because of that?
I'm not sure how much I have still to hold on to in history without it. Like, so when people are like, okay, why are you a Christian? What it comes down to is I can't let go of the fact that the tomb was empty. And I don't mean that in a spiritual sense. Like, I think that the tomb being empty is absolutely essential to the gospel. That he rose from the dead, like, and he had to actually do it in real space and real time. Even though it uses mythological language throughout the Bible to explain this earth site, end site thing, that sacred time, sacred space, sacred. What do we have left?
Then how do you distinguish between the things that matter historically and the things that don't? Like, you identified certain things that have to be, for you, historically, this matters. And then these other things historically don't matter as much. But how do you figure that out?
Sometimes it's easy, right? The genre is super simple to be able to figure that, or not super simple, but it has a heavier warrant to me, right? Some things are written in more of a historical style, like they're trying to give us. Luke will say, I'm writing this to give you the facts of what happened. Whereas stories where snakes talk, that's a little easier for me to figure out. But you're right. Like, why is the ascension not as important to me as the resurrection? I don't know that I have great answers to that. Like, I've been struggling with those things for a long time.
But and I want to say this for someone in another place where the ascension doesn't matter, and it's for them it's the descension. And so it's different, a different way of verbalizing the same thing. Just like if you were to say, let me preface this, I believe in the resurrected Christ as well, right? But if you were to say, it means he resurrected in my heart, then that's a place to start. And for someone who's just coming to believe, especially right now, you lay down for them what it means to follow Christ, what Christ did for us, and then hopefully that resonates in their heart, because none of us are actually going to see or were there when Christ resurrected. So we can't prove it. So it's by faith alone, good Presbyterian here. So why is that different than, and I know it's different for me, but why is that different for you? Why would you be done if that was the case? If it was just.
Well, let me back up. I don't know how to answer that question probably, but it's not just faith alone in the sense the way that you made it seem. Like, we can't prove it, so it's just faith. I don't really think that's what sola fide is. Like, this is not some blind leap in logic. Like, I think there's plenty of warrant for it. Whereas I can't prove anything. I can't prove that George Washington existed either, but I think there's plenty of warrant for me to hold to such a belief, right? That he actually existed. But I think there's plenty of warrant to say that Jesus got up from the dead.
Well, we can't.
There's a dozen other books that write about this, and a whole bunch of books outside of the Bible that talk about this resurrection. But I do think that there is historical evidence for such a thing. I don't think I'm blindly just leaping in here. Now, I've forgotten your exact question, but I don't think I could have answered it anyway, as I recall.
Well, I don't think rationalizing faith can go very far, because it's not very rational to be a Christian anyways. You know, I believe it because it's absurd, is I think Tertullian. I believe because it's absurd. I believe it was Tertullian that said that, but it is.
Jason said that a little bit ago, something similar, that you believe about the resurrection because that's what's so important, that you had to overcome that. You believe it because it's absurd that a man, a God, actually rose from the dead. Jay said that a minute ago.
It's absurd, but I believe it too, and it's transformed my life, and that is the witness that we all have. Like you also said that earlier, Jace. You said we should be living these transformed lives that people see and they want to be. It's attractive.
Was that the end of your sentence? Sorry.
Yes, it is. I'm done. I'm done, dude. This is great.
I'm easily distracted.
Like, I don't see how. Okay, another thing.
I'm still with Josh Patterson. I'm more about the incarnation. Like, it's less about the resurrection. It's the fact that God loves us so much, he became a man. Like, that's what's still left, even without the resurrection. Like, it's the fact that God became one of us, Emmanuel. And of course we killed him, because why wouldn't we? You know?
But Josh also doesn't believe our maybe he does or not. He's not here to defend himself, but from what I understand, Josh doesn't take too well with atonement. And to me, the Bible screams atonement throughout and propitiation and you know, I don't. Yeah, there's some things I'm grappling with. I don't have a stance yet. I'm preparing one though for Josh on atonement.
He doesn't disagree with atonement. He disagrees with penal substitutionary atonement. So there's several different things of atonement as to how it is that God saves us on the cross. But I do think the cross is absolutely essential to the salvation process. And I do think the fact that he rises from the dead is what makes us rise. I mean, he's the first fruits of the resurrection, Paul says. So my hope of eternal life is based on him also living forever, coming back from the dead. So I don't know why I would hope for something that I mean, that's why I hope for it. That's why Paul's explained that to us. So I don't agree with Josh that the Emmanuel is more important than the resurrection. I'm not sure how one could exist without the other. Like,
Let's preface the Josh Patterson.
yes, the incarnation story is absolutely essential and beautiful and oh my goodness, wonderful. But I don't know why the resurrection is less. To me, that is.
Well, what does the incarnation mean if there's no resurrection? I mean,
yeah, God became small to walk around on earth and do what? Just show
and
us.
then die. I mean, I think without the resurrection, the incarnation doesn't make any sense. But I don't know. I'd have to think that one through a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is great that he showed us a great way to live. And if we want to hold to that kind of atonement theory, that the whole reason for his existence and his death is that he just sacrificed himself and we should be like Jesus and sacrifice ourselves. But I don't think that's the only thing Paul says. Like, I think something happened on the cross that defeated the dark forces. And I think he had to get up again in order for them to be ultimately crushed in Revelation. Like, that's the story. So.
Oh, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, it's time to eat.
It's time to eat. Yep, I got you.
Oh.
All right. It is 6:13. Apparently, I need to go eat now. So I'm going to do so. You guys can keep talking amongst yourselves.
So I was the one who invited him to eat. So yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy
Yes,
who.
you
All right.
Just tell them about our heavy conversation.
All right. You guys can stay on. I'm going to cut and run and get some food. And some of you I'll see tomorrow. No, actually, probably just Josh. The rest of you, I'll see any of you guys, actually.
We know you believe in Jesus, a resurrected Jesus, one that died on the cross for our sins. Okay, we love you, Jace.
I believe
Hopefully
in
everybody
Jesus.
knows that. All right.
I believe in Jesus.
All right. He believes in Jesus too. Excellent. All right. See you guys later.
All right.